Hello. I took some notes during live class, so I'll be referencing those notes in this video. One of the first things that we discussed was the difference between SPSS and R. I know at the beginning of this class, someone asked, are we going to be using SPSS? And you let us know that we will be using R for this course. I do remember using SPSS in college, and I think at that point I was newer to statistics, so it was difficult from a sense of I don't know statistics, so I'm going to blame SPSS for my misknowledge or misunderstanding. However, now to have a better idea of statistics and the expectations, I did a little bit of research on the differences between R and SPSS, and I do agree that R is a better platform, and there are some advantages and disadvantages to both, but I do understand why we are using R instead of SPSS. So looking at some of my notes, I know flexibility was one of the biggest differences between R and SPSS. R uses like a programming languages, so it offers more flexibility in regards to customizing the output and just customizing in general compared to SPSS. And then also advanced statistical analysis. So it provides just a wider range of statistical methods compared to SPSS. So it includes advanced machine algorithms, which can be helpful for overall output. And I think that was just helpful for me because as I continue to grow and advance in my statistical knowledge, I do want to understand which platforms are the best, and not just which ones are the best, but why are they the best and what are the advantages and disadvantages for both. But I am interested in learning more about some of the advantages of SPSS and if it can be more helpful or useful in different situations compared to R. We spent a lot of time discussing the results of the paper and why it's important. And you mentioned that the results is probably the most important section of an empirical paper. I remember in a class that I was in with you before, which was translational research, you also mentioned it again in live class, that typically when you start an article, an empirical research article, you review the abstract and you try to get a general understanding of what the question is and how those questions could be potentially answered. And then you jump straight to the results sections, look at the charts, look at the figures, and say like, is this something that I'm interested in? And like you said, not from a stance of I'm not interested because I don't like it, but is it something that can potentially be supported through research, and is there more to learn about it? And I've been trying that technique and it has been really helpful. And then going back up and obviously reading the entire article. So this week when I was reading, I definitely tried that method. I still feel like I have some practice to do because sometimes it's hard for me to just fully understand what the researchers are asking without reading the full paper. But I guess that's just like kind of like a learning mechanism, more so being able to extract that information from the abstract. And then we discussed a lot about just chapter 7 and the readings for this week. So in summary, chapter 7 focuses on just importing data into R and then like exporting that data and computing it into tables and charts. And it focuses a lot on managing missing values and writing to files, and it emphasizes the importance of understanding how data is structured before importing it and then transforming it. And I think you had mentioned something about just because you put it into R and it exports doesn't mean it's always going to immediately make sense. So that's when we have to make sure that we're adding in data correctly, computing data correctly. Because I know last week when I was doing my mock results and I was trying to get my bar charts, I felt like the way I was inputting the codes when it was exporting the data sets and the tables and figures, it just didn't necessarily make sense, and it wasn't showing my data in the way that I wanted it to be shown. So just getting myself in the habit of just because R computes something and it displays a figure or a table doesn't necessarily mean that's the end all be all, but like making sure that my data is really displaying the story that I want to tell. And you did mention like be skeptical because everything isn't always what it seems. So I've been challenging myself to do that. And then you did mention we should be able to take a look at a figure and get a good idea of what the results are. And that's kind of what I was struggling with, because I showed my results and I was like, if someone were to just see these results with the research questions, would they understand the story that I was trying to tell? And the answer was no. So I had to obviously readjust and recompute my data so that the results did show exactly what I wanted it to show. We talked about descriptive uncertainty and inferential uncertainty. So you defined it as, it was defined as the data can be, for descriptive uncertainty, when data is described but there's some uncertainty. So that's measured through variability. And then inferential uncertainty is whether our results are due to chance. So this is measured by probability. And I think this was also explained in the book this week, but it was also helpful the way that she broke it down and just explained it for that. So one of the questions I had was just like understanding, is the difference meaningful when it comes to significance? So I know the word significance can't be used outside of statistics when it comes to research, and then it just measures like how meaningful the difference is. And I guess like my question is, if we can't use the word significant to describe other types of science, is there a different word or phrase that we can use to describe other types of science that can kind of mimic significance? Because I know sometimes when I'm doing my single subject research for other class, I want to use the word significant to describe a difference, but I know that it's not statistical in measure. Statistical in nature, so it makes it kind of difficult, but it's not necessarily a mandatory word to be used, so I can explain my data regardless of using the word significant. But I do wonder, is there a different phrase to be used? And then also we discussed the degrees of freedom. So it's defined as the number of independent values that are free to vary and sample before it is just correct. So I guess when it comes to degrees of freedom, is there a way for there to be an error per se? So I know the example you mentioned was at least one person ordered chicken. And one person out of 5 ordered chicken. So if the first 4 were no, the 5th one absolutely has to be yes, they ordered chicken, and that is the degree of freedom. So I guess in cases like that, is there a way, like if you got to the 5th person and the answer was no, they didn't order chicken, does this happen? And like, what is there like a phrase for that, or like how do you fix that? And I guess I would just fall under the idea of like an error, like there was an error in the system to calculate that output. But I guess that's my main question. So as far as like the course, my classmate mentioned that he feels like it's just kind of moving too fast and he's having a hard time keeping up. I don't necessarily think the course is moving too fast in general. I think I'm just having a hard time computing what I'm trying to research into statistical measures. So as mentioned, the research that I'm using for this class, obviously I've had to adapt my questions and kind of my measurement strategies to make it statistical compared to single subject. And I think that's kind of the hardest thing I'm faced with right now, because it kind of feels like I'm changing the complete direction of my study by switching it to statistics. But again, this is not like I'm doing this for my dissertation, but I do kind of wonder how to balance some of the things that I'm interested in using single subject research and translating it to statistical measurements, but also making sure I'm not like changing what I'm looking for and changing kind of like the meat of the study. But I think the feedback that you've been providing week to week on my research reports, the little mock research reports, has been helpful, because this week we were prompted to go back to our initial research questions, and I'm realizing that even though they changed a little bit, it still is in the same realm and I'm still getting meaningful information. So I'll pull up my initial research questions. So my 2 initial research questions were does BST improve the ability of BCBAs to deliver disciplinary feedback compared to intervention? And are the effects of BST on disciplinary feedback skills maintained over time? So the revised questions are now, does BST improve the ability of BCBAs to deliver feedback compared to didactic training as measured by the behavior observation scale? So one of the things you said in some of the feedback that you said in my report was, isn't BST better than anything? Like, if we're not comparing it to something, isn't some type of training always better than no type of training? So that's when I had added in the didactic training, because I do agree that since I wasn't comparing it towards anything else, not obviously, but it's highly likely that the group receiving the BST is going to show more improvement than a group receiving no type of additional training. So I think adding in the didactic training was really helpful, and I think that's something I'm definitely going to consider with my dissertation, going back to the single subject research and figuring out how to compute that. And then the revised second question are the improvements in disciplinary feedback delivery skills from BST maintained over time as measured by BOS? So that one is actually pretty much the same as the initial second question. It's just kind of tweaked as far as the wording of it, but I definitely am still interested in the maintenance over time aspect of it. So yes, thank you.